Fun fact, Jumbo Love doesn't have an anchor.
You just go to the top of the wall
Yeah, you just climb all the way to the top.
and then you walk down. Like,
Yeah, and then
how do you
then
get
you're just
down?
like, fuck. I just down climbed like 30 feet and jumped off.
Isn't that sort of a bummer when a route doesn't have an anchor?
Yeah, but it's like at the top of the head wall, and it's like it's just such a vision, it's just such a quest to even be up there that it kind of like suits the mood, you know. There is an anchor. I shouldn't say there's not an anchor, but it's like the cliff is like this, you know, like this is the climbing aspect, and the anchor is like over here. Like there's no way you could lower from it. Like there's just two
Hmm.
bolts. You like summit, you're like sitting in a bivy, and then it's like back there, you know. It's pretty funny actually.
That's what I hate most about Joshua Tree. Everything you climb, you're like, oh, I got to the top. Now there's no way to get down. And you're like, oh,
Yeah.
maybe there is an anchor, but it's on the other side of the formation. And you're
Yeah.
like, what do I do with this anchor? And you're like, oh, I guess I just untie and down solo some other route. And you're like, why
Yeah,
is this place
exactly.
suck?
You're like, wait,
Like, I
how do
hate
you
Joshua
clean this
Tree.
anchor?
Yeah. Yeah. I had an epic once in Joshua Tree trying to lower down this like 13 plus crack, and the anchor was set way too far back. And I should have known better, but I was like, oh, I might be able to lower anyway. I lowered like part way and basically got stuck from the rope drag and was just hanging there, being like, well, now I'm just dangling and my rope's too short and I'm stuck and this is totally
Dude,
stupid. It's like I
so
hate stuff like that.
I talked to uh Pat Adams about this exact thing. And he was saying that like him and Colin Lance and some of the OGs in Boulder and stuff, that it was an actual thing where they would like make it a pain in the ass, because the whole idea was that that's why they sandbagged like everything as well, because they were like, we want like the second ascensionist to come to this thing and be like, it's too daunting of a task and it's too hard for me to like want to even do, you know. They just tried to make like everything super pain in the ass. So there's like all the like in particular, there's a route called the Violator that's in Fern Canyon that I remember trying, and it's like the dumbest possible placement of an anchor you could imagine. Like the climb is well over, there's like 20 feet of 5-6, and then the anchor is like, oh, like over the top of the lip, like by 3 feet, you know. And you're like, how would you clean? I remember asking him like, how would you clean this? He's like, oh, I just wanted to make it hard, so like if some Euros came, you know, they'd be confused and probably not repeat it.
Well, I mean, in some ways, that's kind of a good opening for this conversation.
Yeah.
Is how have standards changed? You know, it's like, because that is just not how people bolt anymore. I hope, for the most part. You know, it's like,
Yeah,
it's interesting to think how much and maybe that's just the broadening of the sport in general, is that now when you put up a route, you assume that a lot of people are going to climb it at some point, whereas 25 years ago you were putting it up just to screw your friend or, you know, your local community. You're like, oh, that one guy, screw that guy, he's kind of short, I'm going to put this bolt just out of reach. And you're kind of like, oh, you know, it's like a really different vibe.
or just, I mean, even more specifically, like you're bolting a route to create a pathway for you to climb the route. And like once your experience of climbing the route is over, then in your mind, like that chapter is closed, right? It's not like,
You mean that's the
how
old school
can,
approach to bolting?
yeah, like in a lot of ways, you know, and that doesn't apply to every single route, the old route, but I do think that especially in the mountains, but even like to some large extent, even some sport routes and stuff like that, you know, it's like we're adding protection so that me and my partner can safely pass this section of rock. And after we're done, you know, who cares what the following experience is going to be like?
Yeah. Definitely
I was like,
experienced that myself. Sometimes on your routes, actually.
Now I'm thinking in particular about the experience of Lisi and the people that come after me. And I want to say, you know, I want this experience to build character for them.
Thank you, Josh.
I've heard you've been teaching Alex too to bolt like that as well. That he's put up some masterpieces that are really bringing in the repeats as
The
well.
masses. Yeah.
Well, no, I don't know how much of any of this is usable or you want to use this or not, but we did have a very interesting experience because when Alex and I started this enormous bolting mission together, we both well, several things stuck out in my head that were so funny. Like I remember first rapping the cliff for the first time and being like overjoyed with how amazing the rock was. And I was just like, this is insane. Oh my God, this is crazy. What a find. Like we're so psyched. And in typical Alex fashion, I remember him being like, oh, I don't know. Yeah, it's rock. I mean, it seems all right. It's fine. It'll really be cool. But then it turned out to be totally amazing. And like for sure, one of the best climbing areas in Southern Nevada, if not the Western US. But when we first started bolting, like Alex and I were bolting just directly next to each other. We both spotted lines. We're both coming down the wall, wrap bolting. And we kind of like, bolt our respective routes. We like swap. So we're like climbing on each other's routes. And I remember having quite a bit of feedback for Alex, just like, I'm a little worried with how low this bolt is or how high, this is kind of, I think I would have cleaned that corner a little more and all this stuff. And Alex, pretty quickly from what I remember, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the conversation went pretty quickly to, you know what? I think I've kind of lost my patience for this bolting thing. And I feel like you should just do the bolting and I'll just do like the climbing and maybe do some like ledge work and stuff like that.
No, how many routes did I put up over there? Like 3 or 4 or something, or I don't know. We each did like a handful on that first sector.
I will say that in the end, I think once Sonny and some of the friends in our community had a chance to also give you feedback, that you did go back and you made changes and you edited, and it turned out to be a lovely route. And I think that you did add 2 or 3 more routes in the end.
Yeah, I can't remember. I mean, to me, the biggest takeaway actually was the cleaning stuff. I mean, the bolting, the thing is fundamentally, I just have a different approach to bolting, which is the bare minimum required. It's like the thing that's coming from climbing walls and trad climbing. You just feel like, you put in the bolts that you need. Like certainly no one is going to get injured on the route that I put up. It's still a protected sport route. It's just people are going to be afraid. And you're kind of like, it's fine to be a little bit afraid as long as it's actually safe. You know what I mean? I think there's just a different background. I mean, you think like most of the old school sport climbing areas in the Western US have that exact same style, where it's like bolted to prevent injury, but not to make it comfortable or easy or, accessible. It's like, it's just bolted to make it possible. I was like, oh, when you bolt with that mindset, it's like, yeah, I mean, obviously you get some complaints, but it is safe. Like, it's fine.
Totally. Yeah.
Actually, but the bigger thing I took away from it though is that if you want people to enjoy a route, you have to clean it well enough.
Yeah.
It's like the cleaning is almost more important than bolting in some ways to make it enjoyable.
Totally. I remember I've done quite a bit of bolting with a good friend of mine, BJ Tilden, who's an incredible first ascensionist. And I remember him saying once that a well-cleaned route is worth at least 1 star. And I totally agree. It's like most rock creates somewhat interesting movement and it's something fun to climb on. If it's cleaned properly, it's worth 1 star. Yeah.
Yeah, or that's the difference between a 3-star and a 4-star route. It's like,
exactly.
You can have the most incredible route, but if the holds are really sharp and everything's kind of unpleasant, you're like, it's just not that classic. And then you just file off a few little sharp crossels, and suddenly you're like, it's a classic. And you're like, yeah, well, the route's the same. You just took some of the spiky little parts off some of the holes.
Or you hammered off some like tempting Choss jug undercling that's like 3 feet off that, you're just avoiding because you don't want to kill your belayer, but when it's gone, you don't have to avoid it at all.
That was actually one of the things I really learned from new routing a little bit, was that I put up a route, I cleaned what I thought was the route, and then the very first person I watched climb it suddenly grabbed all these random things way out to one side. I was like, what is that? I was like, they shouldn't go. I was like, oh my God, they're going to die. They're going to kill the belayer. Yeah. What are they doing? Like, that is not. And it made me realize that like my vision just had not extended 2 meters to the right or wherever they were. And I was like, this is no man's land. Like, you should not be over there. Yeah. I was like, oh no. But I think that just goes to show that when you put up routes, you kind of have a responsibility to kind of clean the whole swath of, I guess you don't have a responsibility, but you probably ought to feel a responsibility to clean the whole area, because some random person is basically going to kill themselves or their belayer, like assuming that it's all good to go.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you kind of have to cast a wide net, like, look at a big swath of wall and be like, okay, I got to clean all this, because you never know what somebody's going to try to grab.
Totally. And okay, so like particular in regards to that route I was talking about before, that was a level, I think it ended up being 12A, right? And that's a level of route for you, Alex, that you climbed first try. And exactly like I was mentioning before, in some ways to you, that might mean like, oh, chapter is closed. I bolted the route, I cleaned it a little bit, I climbed it. Now let's move on. Where, you know, if you had bolted like a 514 or something, you would have so many more iterations to go up the route and say, oh, I should clean a little bit over there. I'll clean a little bit here. It's like, it's kind of easier in that way if you're bolting a project level route to make sure, because, and also it's hard. So you're going to examine other beta opportunities and you're going to like move a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. In a lot of ways, it's easier to make those hard routes clean than it is like when I bolt like warm-ups for me or like moderates or whatever. That's when I really have to think differently, like think about someone that might have 511 as their project grade and like, oh, where are they? They like, I'm not going to climb 6 feet out of the way to grab that jug, but like somebody might, you know, somebody likely will. And
That actually
might be up
raises
to
sort
me
of
to-
there raises the interesting point that with a lot of the old school trad routes and sort of like big routes, they're always really run out up to maybe 511-ish. And then all of a sudden when it starts to get pretty hard, like basically at the limit of whoever was bolting it, suddenly 511 and 512 and certainly 513 is suddenly pretty tightly bolted. And
Mhm.
occasionally 513 is actually just bolted as a bolt ladder because somebody was punching it ground up. So basically they soloed a 5.9 pitch, they did super run out 511, and then all of a sudden you get to an actual bolt ladder where there's a bolt every 3 feet for the next pitch because they just bolted a bolt ladder up a 513 pitch.
Mhm.
And actually I've always taken that as an example that ground up bolting is a little bit dumb because, you know, with the same hole count, you could make a much better route by spacing things a little more evenly. And, you know, you could be safer on the easier terrain and more normal on the hard terrain and have a better experience overall for everybody. But it's just hard to execute that ground up.
Yeah, and
it's
I
just
mean,
interesting.
totally. And furthermore, I mean, just from my experience of bolting ground up versus bolting top down, like there's just features you can see in the wall from the top that you just can't from the ground. And so you kind of end up like oftentimes bolting ground up, you end up putting bolts what might seem amazing to you, but 3 or 4 feet higher on the route, you're like, oh, this ledge is a jug. I thought it was a sloper from down there. And then all of a sudden you're like, wow, that bolt's kind of in a stupid spot and I should move, you know, and
But then that's compounded in when you're in places like Yosemite where you're hand drilling, because if you spend 40 minutes hand drilling a bolt with a hammer,
yeah,
and it turns out that your bolt is 4 feet to the wrong side, you're like, you know what? Screw it. Someone can just put a long sling on it.
yeah,
'Cause
you're like,
there's
they're
no
gonna have
way
a
you're gonna
48-inch runner.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And you know, and it's too bad because it makes for way worse routes, but you can totally understand why people do that because, you know, they're basically developing elbow tendonitis trying to put in a bolt. They're like,
Dude, it's
is this
wild.
worth it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put an inch bolt in the valley is like literally takes it. I could bolt like half a sport route in limestone with a drill in the same amount of time.